Leave me alone and get your own life.
I don't want to be alone.
I am so lonely. All the other Viltrumites are scared of me.
I like to be alone. I'm a workaholic who is rarely happy with mediocrity. There's nothing wrong in being okay with enough, but I admit my own hubris. I'm greedy and prideful. In the back of my mind, I want to be recognized and rewarded for my effort, but I'm sure I'm not alone in this sentiment. In fact, it's those who come to the acceptance of their current state in life, whether it be career, personal relationships, or hobbies, that are often the happiest. I, among many, are not one of those people. I'm highly competitive and often want to be number one at what I do, no matter what it is. This mindset leads to seclusion or self-isolation, to be more fair. There's always going to be work to be done, and I delude myself to believing it can all be done if I just go 100% on everything all of the time. Eventually, the work will be complete and the task will dry up. I've done it all. The job that pays me, this video editing shtick I do, all of it. If I just work hard, I can do it all. I can be complete. More specifically, beyond just being a heavy worker, I do a full-time gig running a retail store. It's corporately ran with over 120 other locations, but with that said, I still want to be number one in sales, loyal customers, all of it, and oftentimes, I believe I am. Here's me on a trip I won/earned by doing just that. See, me, there, in Vegas. There's me, at the biggest tactical convention in the world. Invite only. Anime glasses push. I've been promoted twice in less than 2 years, and it's not enough. I'm power hungry, not for the ability to tell others what to do, or anything like that. I just feel if I was in charge, I could do it better. I'm aware this is rather egotistical. Please bear with me. By being number one in this specific case, you have to be friendly. You have to not only sell the products, but yourself. Be authentic, but not too authentic. Be assertive, but not too assertive. You have to have a perfectly constructed personality ready to switch an aspect of yourself on a moment's notice. I'm good at it.
Damn good at it.
And I choose to use these powers for good, getting folks into the top-of-the-line tactical apparel and gear that I truly believe in. And with a little convincing, you will too. In my eyes, it's better than a car with a crazy interest rate or some new medication that has ungodly side effects. This little dance I do on the daily is exhausting, and so when I get off work, I want to be alone. Alone in silence in my craft, i.e., this and other things like this. But let's be honest, Schedule 1 has consumed me. I grinded that all day today. It's currently 12:48 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I spent way too much time playing that, but enough about this. Now Kaylee, my fiance, this beautiful woman right here, she's my rock, and keeps my neuroses in check a majority of the time, making sure I don't work myself to illness or making sure I eat, because work comes before my own needs in my mind. She keeps me from being an office hermit or making rash life-altering decisions, allowing me to live every once in a while. God, I love this woman. I like to imagine I'm the wind in her sails, supporting her no matter what she wants to do and helping her break the rules every once in a while. If I were to describe our relationship, we're a wacky waving inflatable arm two men. I'm the inflatable and her my fan, giving me the breath to keep the show running and not deflating into a rubber pile on the ground. She's order, I'm chaos. Nonetheless, enough about my career and personal life. That's not really what this is about. Point is, I see a lot of people, thousands a year, and when I get home, I get to see my amazing soon-to-be wife. It's good that I'm being socialized like a dog at a dog park. Similar to dogs being socialized, socialization is good for humans too, even as draining as it can be. It's both physically and mentally rewarding. But let's talk about it. Let's say I didn't have to interact with anybody ever. Let's say I didn't have to talk to customers, Kaylee, my friends, yes I have those surprisingly, the list. More importantly though, in this scenario of didn't, let's say I can't interact with anybody else. All I am for the foreseeable future is locked in a room, video editing. Let's up the ante. Let's say it's an empty room, or a raft, or a piece of metal orbiting the Earth. Alone, completely isolated. What would happen to me? Because when there's no one around and nothing to do, you truly are. Throughout the course of human history, isolation studies have been conducted. Controlled environments where the subject is in a sterile area with safety measures in place before too much mental harm has gone down. What about those unlucky few who aren't in these merciful studies? They'll get their section, but let's see what we can't gather from science. To kick us off. Wait, what's that sound? That's Michael from Vsauce. But he's not doing a strictly Vsauce thing. So, is he still Michael? Well, yeah, he's Michael with Minefield now. Minefield Season 1, Episode 1 talks about isolation, the long-term effects, and even gets some first-hand accounts of prisoners and their lives following the experience. Beyond Minefield, most prisoners of solitary confinement share a similar tale, which can be read about more in the book Hell is a Very Small Place, a collection of accounts or essays released in 2014 composed together by 3 authors recollecting varying experiences in confinement. When released, common symptoms were overstimulation by crowds and an inability to handle the close proximity in which non-confinement individuals would engage each other. Other notable accounts were the lasting and prolonged effects of such an experience, and it was a survivor's mentality often held by those who had made it through, permanently altered by what they had gone through with lasting psychological effects relating to circadian rhythms and, most commonly, memory. We're about to get a glimpse of this as Michael, from Minefield, is going to undergo 3 days of simulated solitary confinement, as 3 days is the longest we're predicted to go without receiving brain damage. Brain damage from what, you may ask? Well, what they don't tell you is that if you're alone long enough, a god of loneliness with a brick shows up and bonks you. In all seriousness, humans need external stimuli to undergo synapse growth, and the largest contributor to external stimuli is other people. But really, what we need is new information. Books, movies, people. Something to stimulate the sense and scratch that brain itch of yours. The video we're about to break down briefly goes into further depths of how boredom falls on the emotional spectrum under the same feelings as disgust. Yes, it's good to be patient and self-satisfied, but it's healthy to rid oneself of boredom, which is a side effect of not being permitted to let your brain grow. By isolating oneself from all external stimuli, you can begin to expect a degradation of mental capacity. Michael will be doing true isolation similar to the United States prison system and solitary confinement. For this experiment, he will be in a white room destitute of anything notable with a fluorescent light that never goes out. He has a bed, a washpan, a food source, soylent, water, his thoughts, and 3 days of complete isolation, 72 hours. To give the spark notes of this roughly 30-minute video, Michael begins to go nuts almost immediately. Sure, he entertains himself briefly, taking 100 steps and doing push-ups, but then after only a few hours, the cracks begin to appear. First, we see a distortion of his circadian rhythm, very common, or in other words, his sleep cycle and internal clock. Michael has the perception that several more hours have passed than what has happened in reality, a pattern that will not be going away anytime soon. After a few hours, it's time for his first sleep period in the cell. This is where the monitoring team of psychological academics suspect that the worst of the isolation effects will begin to take place. As you're aware, humans, despite being recommended to do so, don't sleep in perfect 8-hour increments. Michael there first goes to bed sometime between the 72-hour start mark and when he wakes up at the 66-hour mark, with still a little less than 3 days to go. Michael talks to the isolation chamber's camera, suspecting it's around 8 a.m. on Thursday, maybe even closer to 9 a.m.
And I woke up maybe 1 or 2 times in the night. So I think it's probably, 8 a.m. Thursday morning, maybe closer to 9 a.m. I guess I should have some breakfast.
Newsflash, it's a little before 5 a.m. He's woken up bright and early, but it's the lack of sun in his internal clock that has done him a disservice. He continues to work out, count, do mental exercises like saying the alphabet backwards. Fun fact, he was like the only person I've ever seen do this successfully. No, go watch it. He actually does it. This goes well until he talks to the camera several hours later, once again, suspecting it's 7 p.m. of the same Thursday. It's actually only 11:30 a.m., so what the fuck? Michael has been awake and active for about 6 hours with 59 hours remaining, but perceives that from his point of view of waking up at 9 a.m., 10 hours have passed. He says he will have dinner now. It's quite literally not even midday.
It's amazing how hard it is to tell what time of day it is just based on your body. I think it's about 7 or 7:30 p.m. on Thursday. I think I'm going to have dinner now.
Another camera check, Michael states that it's been 24 hours. It's now 3:35 p.m. that same Thursday, and only 17 hours have passed.
Bored, but obviously nothing dramatic. If I had to guess, it would be 24 hours now since I first came in.
By not having a clock or even the sun to gauge time in days, Michael is becoming increasingly separated from the actual time of day. He then goes to sleep once again, because that worked out great for him the first time, and thinks it's the next day. In reality, Michael has slept less than an hour. This is not good. Eating habits have gone completely out the window, with him stating that he's having breakfast at 8 p.m. on that same Thursday. Entertaining himself and losing so much track of time, Michael has completely become unsynced, stating it's 9 p.m. on Friday, when in reality it's a little before 2 a.m. on Friday. He's got a long one ahead of him, almost losing an entire day. He's attempting to sleep nearly every 6 hours. Michael on Friday begins to lose it completely, hallucinating missing water bottles, a decline in cognitive functions, reoccurring dreams of the very same room he's locked in. With 12 hours left, Michael has no sense of time. He's frustrated, and his cognitive decline and emotional decline are clearly present. He's hallucinating the lights are changing color, appearing more yellow in the morning, confusing dreams with reality, even going so far as to opening the door briefly, believing that someone had knocked. Eventually, he's near catatonic when he finally receives an actual knock on the door. The 3 days are up, and Michael has spent 72 hours in complete isolation. Now let's analyze what occurred with Michael from Minefield. This isn't Michael from Vsauce, they're separate entities. Following his release, Michael was tested by the staff, and in some of the tests performed better than the period of time prior to entering. This is attributed to the adrenaline in Michael's system from being released, suspecting the adrenaline was sourced from him being that happy about leaving the room.
There you go. I would say you did actually a little bit better this time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Although we had hypothesized you would be worse at all of these tests, I think the rush of adrenaline that you got from finally being out and being able to communicate actually had you more focused, more aware, and that's why you...
Isolation, even self-imposed, clearly has some dramatic effects to the health and mind of people. To begin, Michael almost immediately loses his sense of time, and it probably didn't help that he took a nap within the 2 hours of entering the room. I think I got that narrowed down, by the way. Spanning from his lost sense of time passing was the change in his meal and sleep schedule, as we've observed. Michael was eating meals and calling it lunch or dinner, when in reality they were more likely attuned with breakfast or even a midday snack. This basis of time, spanning from when he felt the need to sleep or eat, further removed him from the actual time of day, and in this case made his stay in isolation feel nearly a day longer. Beyond biological components such as tiredness and hunger, Michael almost begins to lose it mentally in no scientific terms pretty much immediately, as we saw. As I haven't been completely isolated without daylight for 3 days myself, I have no room to judge, but boy would I like to. Experience that this is, not judge. I'm pretty judge-free. It'd just be cool to experience this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, as miserable as it seemed. We see Michael begin to question his surroundings, forgetting about where he put things like water bottles, as well as becoming increasingly more irritable within the situation, like why the lights are so bright and how the soap is not a pleasant scent. His dreams become engulfed with the premise of the room itself, only dreaming of the room, making the distinction of reality and the dreamscape near inseparable, which seems to also make it feel longer. This was only after 3 days, and despite Michael's true-to-the-cause examination, he could have left the room at any time. He wasn't a prisoner, but a subject, and a committed one at that. He's got hats off to him. Experiments like this have been done numerous times, and there are ethical concerns involved as you're essentially doing psychological damage for the sake of science. Not a new concept. Humans tend to draw the line more often than not when science exceeds animal testing for whatever reason. I get putting lab rats in mazes. It seems fun for them. It seems fun for me. But putting chemicals on rabbits for makeup and sending dogs into space is somehow a newly found discovery of not being that cool of a thing to do in terms of being an involved species. But back to the history of experiments. In one case at McGill University, several subjects were selected to undergo isolation for 3 days, similar to Michael from Minefield, not Vsauce. But instead of left in an open room to their own devices, the subjects would be kept in a somewhat sensory isolated state. Being blindfolded and equipped with noise-canceling headphones revealed that the subjects were more prone to hallucinations, and vivid ones at that. compared relatively to what we saw with Michael. Missing water bottle, get the fuck out of here. It's about to get real. Some of the accounts of the experiments reported hallucinations such as intense geometric patterns that took over the entirety of their field of vision. Another was an imagery of mice acting human within a marketplace with their intricate little mice economy. That's kind of a different one. And another one that's kind of freaky is even imagining that their bodies had split and that the subjects were perceiving from two bodies, or that there was another person in the room with them. Considering it was 1950 something, this was new information and extremely interesting, which would lead to further tests, but this experiment, that's a relic of the past, and we must look to the future. The future, like the isolation test performed by spacefaring agencies. The premise is that space travel is an inherently long process, with a trip to Mars taking 6 to 9 months, even with today's technology, not to mention that time would be extremely isolating beyond a crew of colonists or astronauts, or crazy people as we call them. Hence, we need to understand how humans would react in such a situation with tests and experiments. One I found pointedly relevant was the Mars 500 experiment performed from 2007 to 2011, put on by Russia, the European Space Agency, and China. Briefly said, subjects were selected to study the effects of global isolation with a group of 6 people from the 3 countries. These 6 people were selected to spend 520 days in a facility that would emulate life on Mars. In short, there were language barriers and differing cultures, but after the 520 days, everyone turned out, well, pretty okay. No major conflicts needed interference from external people like staff, and everyone got along pretty chummy. They did experiments, watched movies in different languages, and worked through the provided challenges as a team, successfully navigating the facility for over a year. In addition, and more on a human note, they would celebrate birthdays and respective countries' holidays as well, like Chinese New Year's and even Halloween. Boo! The only respective downside was that the crew members became increasingly less active, spending more time in bed compared to when the mission first started. And don't get me wrong, I'm good with numbers, but I'm pretty sure it was like 700%, so like I'm downplaying it, but like, I mean, what else are you gonna do? At least they weren't killing each other. Overall, it revealed that humans can play a significant factor in mitigating each other's suffering and isolation, reducing the effects we saw with Michael and inmates. What happens, though, if we extend the time and the conditions in which we find ourselves further than a year? How about 5? What about 40? In 1965, a man was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to spend his time at the Angola State Prison. Angola State Prison, located well in the middle of nowhere on a plot of land that was once a Louisiana plantation the size of Manhattan, is the largest maximum security prison in the United States and now the location of one Albert Woodfox, where he would spend 44 years in solitary confinement. Woodfox would be originally sentenced to 50 years for his initial crime of armed robbery outside of confinement. However, some rather unfortunate developments would occur. A correction officer, Sergeant Brent Miller, would be stabbed to death by sharpened lawnmower blades on April 17, 1972, by, in current day, unknown assailants who will probably never be caught. In 1972, Woodfox, due to his connection with the Black Panther Party, a semi-communist, semi-black supremacy group, but let's be honest, just a group of people, Americans, black Americans, who were tired of living under these uppity crackers' racist laws and oppressive cultural zeitgeist in the form of Jim Crow, would be convicted of murder along with Herman Wallace and Robert King. This trio would be known as the Angola Three due to what followed. Post-conviction, the 3 men would be sent to solitary confinement, where Woodfox would spend the next 44 years alone, with 23 hours of each day of each year spent in that 6x9 cell. Unlike Michael's confinement, where he was simply left alone, Woodfox would experience the oh-so-signature cruelty of humans, not for 3 days, but for over 3 decades. I'll be using excerpts from the interviews, mainly with NPR, throughout the years following Albert's release, with brief explanations from this point forward. Woodfox recounts how the guards would utilize gas and beatings were regular.
Oh my goodness. Well, gas was a standard form of weapons that the security people use. So anytime you challenge inhumane treatment or you challenge unconstitutional conduct, they would gas you, and depending on the severity of the confrontation, they would open up your cell and they would come in and beat you down and then, shackle you and bring you to the dungeon. And you probably would stay there a minimum of 10 days. The fact that I was involved and organizing a lot of protests against, along with Herman and Rob.
Oftentimes, Woodfox would pace his cell to relieve stress, to pass time, to think.
I pace the cell to think. I pace to relieve tension. I lightly box the walls. My knuckles have calluses on them from boxing the wall. I do push-ups on my fists. I don't have deep thoughts. I'm practical. I get through the day the way I have done 1,000 times. Will this be the day I break? I push that thought away. Mind over matter. I keep moving so later I can sleep sometimes.
Woodfox would use his time to expand his education in criminology and social justice, stating that his mother instilled a strong sense of conviction along with values held by the Black Panther Party. Kept in inhumane conditions, he would make a list to keep his sanity of things he would do if ever released from Angola. And in 2016, of February 19th, Woodfox's 69th birthday, he would be released from prison after lengthy appeals, evidential review, and the greater public's advocacy for his release, which arguably did not get him out in this case. This was only done because of a plea deal taken that lessened the conviction, even though the case was overturned twice, but the state ultimately indicted him each time. Justice did eventually prevail, and Woodfox was a free man after 44 years of a wrongful conviction. While Albert's life was frozen in time by a system that persecuted him based on the color of his skin and his beliefs, the rest of the world continued to turn. Though the Black Panther Party no longer existed, it was the fundamental beliefs to stay strong in the face of oppression and never give in to the oppressors that helped Albert through his time in prison, but also motivated his life following the release. In Woodfox's memoir, Solitary, Unbroken by 4 Decades in Solitary Confinement, My Story of Transformation and Hope, he details his experiences following his release. Albert would speak about his transition from prison to freedom, noting moments of confusion, waking up in his New Orleans bedroom and not seeing an inch of stark concrete, or how he developed severe claustrophobia, having an attack while watching his great niece and nephew compete in sports, feeling as though sitting in the bleachers surrounded by people, he was being smothered by the crowd. Along with claustrophobia, he would find issues with becoming overstimulated. On his list, Woodfox would write he'd like to go to Yosemite and see the sights. When at Yosemite, Woodfox explained how when he saw the waterfalls on a little piece of paper acquired from a magazine clipping, it was a whole lot different than seeing it in person. Shocking, even. An excerpt from The Guardian states, "It was far rougher than I thought it would be. We went to the waterfall way up the side of the mountain. It was quite a task getting there, going up, up, and up. The waterfall was so high. There's a massive spray where the water hits the rocks, and I turned into it. It was like someone had thrown a bucket of ice-cold water on me. It was a wonderful experience in hindsight, but in the moment, I was, what the hell am I doing here? In the cell, it looked so magnificent, but then when I got there, I realized, this is real." Albert was able to live life the way it was intended, free, seeing the wonderful sights and spending time with loved ones. Only for a short time, as in 2022, he would die due to COVID-related complications, only having 4 years of freedom since being arrested by the age of 20. Woodfox's story is not a completely uncommon one. It was a more lengthy battle, but the system of oppression felt by a whole ethnic group or ethnic groups of people ran rampant and unchecked for decades, if not centuries, even into the modern day, even into tomorrow. Another member of the Angola Three, Herman Wallace, had his freedom advocated for by Amnesty International, a nonprofit organization based out of the UK that focuses on human rights. Wallace was granted his freedom after a judge overturned the indictment due to the lack of female jurors being present and was released on October 1st, 2013, but again was overruled by the state on October 3rd, 2013. Sadly, however, Wallace would only experience his liberation for 3 short days before passing away on October 4 prior to his rearrest due to cancer. Albert Woodfox and the other members of the Angola Three showed tremendous spirit and tenacity against unfathomable odds. In my studies on isolation, I would say the Angola Three were some of the most resilient individuals to ever experience such considerable isolation. The mental tenacity and rebound is astonishing. Albert went on to have a successful, as brief as it was, career in public speaking, keeping his civil rights activist roots nearly half a century later and delivering a first-hand account on the trials and tribulations of what it meant to have been a black man in America during that time. He's a testament to the undying will of man, and with a never-ending battle and a desire, no, a need to say he did all he could. If you haven't read his own memoir, I would highly recommend doing so. Another tale from history less related to the United States justice system is that of Jose Alvarenga. Jose currently holds the longest record for stranded at sea with 438 days under his belt, a little more than a year or 14 months. It was November 2012 when Alvarenga set out with a new fishing partner, as his previous was unable to join, a 23-year-old greenhorn by the name of Esguiel Cordoba. The vessel, a topless fiberglass skiff with a single motor and an icebox for storing fish, departed from Chiapas, Mexico. The end goal, catch deep-sea exotic fish such as sharks and swordfish to sell back on land. All was going well for the men until the ship fell victim to a storm being blown off course during the torrential weather that lasted 5 days. During this time, the two men had to dump all their hard work and make the boat all the lighter for maneuverability, but it didn't help. The battery would die, but not before the veteran fisherman could use the boat's two-way radio to contact his boss back on shore, letting him know of the current situation. Along with the battery, a majority of the gear was damaged or thrown overboard, leaving the two men with minimal supplies and food. They were now adrift in the biggest ocean in the world, completely stranded with no way of directing the now floating ship. Search parties were mounted, but unable to find any trace of the missing souls. The search ended after only 2 days with no signs or evidence of the missing boat. Adrift in the ocean, days turned to weeks, and by Alvarenga's account, he was unable to survive by catching fish and birds with his bare hands and staying hydrated on rainwater. Occasionally, former gear would be found floating nearby, which would also aid in survival. Around 4 months, Cordoba, the young inexperienced fisherman, became sick after eating raw food. Surviving the initial sickness, the young sailor refused to eat thereafter, leading to his eventual death via starvation. Alvarenga said that, at this point, this was one of the darkest moments of the journey, having considered suicide for a week following Cordoba's passing, but his Catholic or Christian faith is what kept him going and what prevented him from taking his own life. With the lack of a fellow person, Alvarenga began to lose his grip on reality, talking to the corpse for days. Something he had promised Cordoba during his time alive was that he would not eat his body. After 6 days, Alvarenga threw the body overboard, feeling that it was draining his already fleeting sanity. During his time alone, Alvarenga would report moments where he saw container ships but was unable to signal for any help, as they were too far or didn't notice his small ship. Using the moon to track time after reaching the 15th lunar cycle, or the 15th month, supposedly, Alvarenga found a tiny island. This island turned out to be a remote corner of the Marshall Islands, and on January 2014, he abandoned his boat to swim ashore. On this island, he found a beach house where he stumbled on a local couple who would alert authorities, rescuing Alvarenga, officially ending his journey stranded at sea of 438 days. Traveling over 6,000 miles, Alvarenga was reported to be in good health, besides an unusually low blood pressure. The days following his rescue, his health would decline, requiring an IV drip for dehydration, but he had survived. After his rescue, Alvarenga would be returned to El Salvador, his home, diagnosed with anemia and insomnia. Alvarenga had also developed a deep sense of fear for the water. It's unknown how a fight for survival on the open sea affects the health of people in comparison to solitary confinement. It raises the question of whether this physical battle for life in the everyday is less taxing mentally, but in a very lopsided trade-off to continue living, or if it's just as taxing with both a physical and mental front added to the damage being done. Jose had experienced hallucinations following the death of his fellow fishermen, a concept we discussed in the Mars 500 mission, that fellow humans can mitigate the mental strain in isolation. As we saw, it should also be noted that after the passing of Cordoba, suicidal ideation had occurred to Alvarenga, and he fell into a depressive state. But in addition to this statement, anything helps. By being constantly in survival mode with the constant task of being on the lookout for your next meal or drink, or even being rescued, this dilemma may dampen the crushing isolation felt on that year at sea. Only Jose Alvarenga can truly say. Now, assuming you're not a 2-year-old, you may remember a certain outbreak of a certain virus with the number 19. I already mentioned it earlier in this video, the other half of that, in its name, and I think YouTube has since stopped demonetizing videos, but just to be safe, I'll simply call it the virus after this point, unless it's in a title for a source I'm mentioning. Remember that? Shut down the world, kicked off the summer of 2020. For me personally, it wasn't that bad. I have a touch and go relationship with my family anyway, so it was nice spending it with my parents. I got into Bloodborne and Warzone and had a full-time high-paying essential job of sucking asbestos out of people's houses. It was cool. I was in school, and so being at home just to finish out the semester from home made it easier. For others, not so much of a chill time. In fact, some remember it as hell on earth. At the time, I was a more traditional artist, painting and such, before I switched over to film and got a couple of commissions for funeral portraits. People were dying from this thing, but in addition, others and everyone responsible were secluded to their homes, isolated. On another personal note, I was pretty much unaffected besides not being able to see Kaylee, who was back in her hometown, but in the grand scheme, my struggle was minimal. I'm a hermit to begin with. But some of us began to go a little stir-crazy and experience levels of loneliness and social isolation on levels of unprecedented scales. That's no bueno for your health. An article published in the National Library of Medicine titled Loneliness and Social Isolation During the COVID-19 Pandemic by Huang, Ribeiro, Pasai, Riekman, and Ikeda can let us view the known effects of social isolation and the health effects stemming from isolation, which we've talked about in the other anecdotes, but more so in this specific instance of the multi-month isolation felt by the world. In the article, we learn a few things. Loneliness has been linked with an increase in coronary artery disease and myocardial infarctions. Mentally, it reduces the time spent asleep and in bed, with a 7% decrease in sleep efficiency. Along with lack of sleep, some speculate symptoms of depression can become more pressing, such as poor rating of one's own health, vision deficits, and an overall decrease in quality of life. It's also found that in cases of suicide and suicidal fixations, that loneliness can be sourced as a contributing factor. The list quite literally begins to build up, with countless studies and research performed indicates that loneliness and isolation aren't strictly just feelings of being downtrodden, but rather an actual medical or medically related condition. Poor dietary choices, inclinations to smoke and drink, even going so far as to not taking prescribed, rarely abused prescriptions that could even be life-saving in some cases. These symptoms are all listed in the article mentioned to be factors that at least the majority of people had experienced during the period in this time. But somehow, by the grace of God, the human race made it through with minimal cuts and bruises. Time for the closing examination, so hold on to your seats. We'll be breaking down everything we've learned, and dare I say, throwing out some original ideas, too. Isolation, and complete isolation at that, is an arguably inhumane practice, especially if it's being used as a punishment. Being left in a completely staunch room with only the bare essentials has shown to lead to mental decline, with the most notable symptoms being agitation, irritability, and an overall sense of restlessness. Kicking it up further, left long enough, the progression of these symptoms kick up significantly. A complete destruction of one's circadian rhythm, with meals and sleep being entirely in the air for when they'll come. Add hallucinations on top of that, and reality is completely melted away. Michael was one example of this, but in the collection of essays I had mentioned, Hell is a Very Small Place, even dreams aren't an escape from the single-room hell one is confined to. Exacerbated by the lack of senses available as seen from the McGill study, these hallucinations can completely degrade one's self, and changing the perceived room but still trapped all the same. Memories begin to fade and the brain begins to die in a metaphorical and somewhat literal sense, with the short-term memory problems and damage to trains of thoughts being permanent. Left alone long enough, as seen with the life of Albert Woodfox, the longer in isolation, the more permanent the effects and the more psychological damage that occurs. Withdrawal, as we could say, from no longer being isolated can be noted as irritated by crowds, overstimulation by the free world, and a severe sense of claustrophobia. The dreams persist with moments of confusion and lack of self-awareness in settings and places. Throughout our research, we did hear both from the scientific community and first-hand accounts that anything at all helps delay and minimize the effects of true isolation. Books, movies, magazine clippings, anything to help get your mind off the crushing loneliness. Escapism. Those with access to any form of escape tend to fare better than those simply left with their own thoughts, whether that be learning from limited resources or producing works of whatever, literary or art. Even another person, or 5 in the case of the Mars 500 mission, show that any form of stimulation, whether it be physical media or fellow humans, can make a world of difference in limiting the damaging effects of true isolation. If these people are taken away, we can expect a downward trend in what was being held back, like what we saw with Jose Alvarenga. These symptoms, at most recently talked about in our examination of the virus article, aren't simply in our head, but can manifest in concrete physical symptoms such as heart issues and self-destructive behaviors. This is also a great moment in the video to point out that if you are watching this, then most likely you aren't locked in a room or in space or in a raft in the middle of the ocean. Sometimes, however, it can feel that way. Trapped in a mental prison, too afraid to reach out and make a connection with someone, the feelings of isolation can occur even if you aren't being held against your will. But all the same, it can still feel that way. It's hard to break the cycle of being alone and may even experience some negative side effects from breaking the cycle, but in the end, it's better for your body and mind to be social, to form connections with other people. In today's modern age, despite it feeling like we've never been so disconnected in ideas or motives, it's never been easier to make friends and form connections. There are social clubs for activities you may find yourself interested in, even down to traditionally out-culture hobbies like tabletop games such as D&D and trading cards. There are whole localized communities at your local game shop with a vast array of fellow customers and enthusiasts with the same interests as you, just waiting for some new person to bond with over the mutual hobby. From my experience, people are always looking for new friends, and you just have to reach out and say, I'm here and I don't want to be alone anymore. I want to be connected. I'm always looking for new friends and people to connect with despite my oversaturation of other people most days. I somehow will myself to get away from my work every once in a while and get some healthy social activity, and because deep down, we all know even before watching this video, it's good to be a social butterfly. If you find yourself in a pit of loneliness, an abyss, so to speak, you know what you have to do. There are resources, you just have to be brave enough to reach out to others. I was going to end the video here, as that was a pretty killer outro, but as always, we have to do our tradition of looking at media. Media! I was in the video with like a movie or a TV show or some big Hollywood. It's a big Hollywood propaganda scheme. You fell for it. Stick around. Also, like and subscribe. I really appreciate y'all's support. Now, with isolation in media, there are a few examples that really spoke to me. Most famously is Castaway, released in the year 2000, starring Tom Hanks as Chuck Noland. Chuck is a data analyst or something at FedEx and travels the world solving problems. While flying across the Pacific Ocean on a cargo plane, the plane goes down due to a storm where he washes ashore on a deserted island, the only survivor from the crash. Thus, the battle against isolation begins. Chuck goes through plenty of struggles when it comes to trying to find food and water, but also experiences a mental battle when in vain he attempts to escape the island on a raft headed out to a cargo ship on the horizon only to be washed back up on shore from the riptide. He opened several of the FedEx cargo packages that washed up ashore, finding an angel with gold wings and a Wilson volleyball. During one attempt to make fire, Chuck cuts his hand and begins throwing objects in frustration, leading to a bloody handprint to be left on the volleyball. Chuck draws a face out of the blood and names the object Wilson. Weeks go by and Chuck is pained by his infected tooth, which he removes with an ice skate and a rock. During this period, he also goes through a series of emotions, crushing isolation, joy when he is finally able to make fire, and more notably the companionship felt with the Wilson volleyball, going so far as to talk to it. Eventually, 4 years later, Chuck has adapted to life on the island, and he is able to construct a raft out of more durable cargo material that allows him to break through the tide that kept pulling him back in earlier attempts. While on the escape journey, floating in the open ocean on this crudely constructed raft, Chuck falls asleep, and when he awakes, Wilson, his only companion for the last 4 years, is floating adrift in the sea. Chuck attempts to rescue Wilson to no avail, but soon after is rescued by one of the passing cargo ships. 4 weeks go by since his rescue, and Chuck is returned to the mainland United States, learning he was presumed dead by everyone who knew him. People rejoice in Chuck's return, but he learns that his dentist, rather ironic with him extracting his own tooth, has married and had kids. Not only that, but with Chuck's wife, who has since moved on since being declared dead. He returns a pocket watch to Kelly, his now ex-wife, which he had kept all this time, and she gives him the keys to his old car, something she kept all this time as well. He goes to Texas to deliver the angel statue that motivated him to keep going, and once dropped off at the address, he runs across the woman who was heavily implied to have ordered it. She tells where each road leads at the crossroads they encountered each other, at to which point Chuck turns around and follows the woman back home. It's a fun movie with a bittersweet ending, and of course there's deeper themes, but if you're looking to delve into a movie about isolation, it has themes of loneliness, madness, and the lows of the human experience. Of course, a dramatization of a real-world experience is going to take some creative liberties in character development, but I found Chuck's journey to be true to the research we looked into. Go watch it if you haven't, it's a nice film. Delving further into realm of isolation-based madness, I think The Lighthouse starring Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson does it wonderfully. The setting takes on a remote island off of a New England coast where the only notable structure is a solitary lighthouse. With our protagonists, two men, a seasoned wickie or lighthouse keeper, and a fresh face trying to find financial reward in a new industry. Thomas Wake is the seasoned lighthouse keeper and Ephraim Winslow is the new helper, former logger. Wake pretty much makes Winslow his bitch for 4 weeks, having him repaint the lighthouse and empty chamber pots, but he bears it. Wake is a strange fellow, as Ephraim notices he disrobes before the moonlight and the beacon of the lighthouse every night. One night, Winslow finds a totem of a mermaid imbued in his bed, and later discovers a beached mermaid while emptying chamber pots. She taunts him before he runs back to the lighthouse. During this time, Winslow is being bothered by a one-eyed gull, to which Wake warns him against killing as it is bad luck, and mentions that his previous helper died after losing his sanity. On the day before pickup, Winslow discovers a dead gull in the drinking water, tainting it only to be attacked by that one-eyed gull, to which Winslow kills the beast despite it bringing misfortune. That night, the two men get drunk and speak in esoteric, very Lovecraftian, very Old English. A storm has rolled in the day of pickup. The two men are left stranded on a beach waiting for their ship's arrival. However, the ship never comes, and when they return, Wake informs Winslow that the rations have spoiled. In the days following, the men get drunk every night, and when they run out of alcohol, they begin to drink turpentine mixed with honey. Slowly, the two men begin to lose it, and revelations are made that both men are possibly murderers. Winslow having let his former foreman drown while working as a logger, and whose real name is Thomas Howard. Wake having strong implications that he killed his former co-wickie, who had previously stated had lost his mind. During this time, Howard, who once went by Winslow, was barred entry to the actual beacon of the lighthouse and tries to steal a key from Wake. Wake, talking in his sleep, considers murdering Howard. Madness ensues, and the tipping point is Howard discovers Wake's personal notes on the contract period, stating that Howard should be let go without pay, no less. This is after a wave takes out the actual cottage lighthouse section. This causes the men to begin fighting, where Howard gets the upper hand and begins burying Wake alive. Inside the lighthouse, Howard smokes a cigarette when Wake takes a corner with an axe, getting a swing in on Howard. Howard once again gets the upper hand, and Wake is killed by the axe. Howard grabs the key from him and finally makes his way to the beacon of the lighthouse, finally ready to see what's inside. Opening the glass housing reveals a glowing beacon, which begins to inflict mental and possible physical anguish on Howard before the screen goes white. We cut to Howard on the beach, who has been killed or is on his way to being killed, and is now being eaten by seabirds. The Lighthouse is an homage to an unfinished Edgar Allan Poe story and is littered with references to classical art and literature, which conveys an old source of madness similar to The Shadow over Innsmouth. It's a fun and spooky watch, but also explores isolation with a supernatural twist. It's great seeing two men already on the verge of madness get one last push into the gulf of insanity and the story that follows. As for the relevance to what we've previously discussed, there's not much, but either way, it is a movie about isolation, and so it's made this list, as I found it rather enjoyable. With that said, final part, thanks for all the support, gang. Sorry for the delay. I was super tied up this week, or I guess it's been a month now, but I'm glad I was able to get this one out to you all. I hope you enjoyed it, and peace out.